Welcome back. We're coming to you live in the DC Summit Expo Hall. I'm A.M. Grabelny. I can neither confirm nor deny that I am a solution architect here at AWS. It's a little joke for our public sector friends, Chad.
I like it.
I'm joined with my co-host, Chad, and some wonderful guests we'll get to in just a moment. Chad, please tell everyone at home.
Yeah, my name's Chad Lacey. I'm a global sales strategist with AWS. Happy to be here and really excited about our guests we've got joining us with us. Bobby and Shelby are going to be talking about some machine learning ops. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yep.
All right, good.
Shelby, tell us, who are you?
Shelby Eichenbrod. I'm an AI/ML specialist solutions architect at AWS.
Yep, and
Bobby.
my name's Bobby Lindsay. I'm also an AI/ML specialist solutions architect at AWS.
Okay, so we're here talking operations related to machine learning, or MLOps, as Chad pointed out for us. But we're going to be talking about pipelines specifically, I think, through this talk. I'm a dev. I'm more centric on shipping software. I know what a CI/CD pipeline is. Why do I need a machine learning pipeline? What is it for?
Yeah, well, generally when you're trying to operationalize machine learning, you have some sort of machine learning workflow in your head that you're thinking about. There might be some like data ingestion, data prep, model building, model deployment. And it'd just be really tedious to go about and actually run each of these steps manually. So what you'd like to do instead is really just kind of wrap up all those steps in a machine learning pipeline so that you could just run that pipeline once, have every step be automatically run. And at the end of the day, what you get is essentially consistency, you get automation, and you get reproducibility, kind of like what you have with a DevOps pipeline.
Yeah, it sounds very similar, like in scope at least, and maybe instead of the artifact being some kind of code deliverable, the artifact is the model? Is that a fair?
Yeah, there's a lot of artifacts. Yeah, model's one of them. You've got your data, your features that you produce. So there's a lot of artifacts along the way that you have.
Cool. Well, can you tell us more about some of the technical components of a pipeline?
Sure, so we'll talk specifically about SageMaker Pipelines. So SageMaker Pipelines is actually 3 core components under the covers. One of those is Pipelines itself, which is a Python SDK that allows you to programmatically build pipelines. So you can build out those steps that Bobby talked about, data preparation, model training, model tuning, model evaluation, using a Python SDK, which tends to be what data scientists, ML engineers are really comfortable with. And then there's also Model Registry, which is a central managed metadata store for information about your model versions. So it'll basically collect data about how that model was built, how it performed, and then ultimately where it ends up getting deployed, which kind of leads us into the third component, which is projects. And projects is actually where those CI/CD capabilities come in. So not only are you automating your machine learning workflow, but you're also incorporating CI/CD practices like source and version control, as well as some of those automated triggers to trigger your pipeline.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's, look, the benefits for running a CI/CD pipeline are pretty, I think, clear to people who have engaged in DevOps. Maybe people who are taking these first steps into data science don't see the need necessarily of all this automation, but I think the same types of things apply here, right? Automating these steps, number one, takes away work from you that really is not that interesting, let's be honest. But number two, it helps you actually deliver things more in a de-risked way or a reliable way. So it sounds very much like regular CI/CD pipeline, but just for machine learning training. Why wouldn't I build this myself? Like, what are some of the benefits of using AWS's pre-built version versus something like Kubeflow?
Yeah, so machine learning pipelines they need a lot of functionality. So you're talking about integrations with a lot of the common tooling that you would need as a data scientist or a machine learning engineer. This could be things like Spark for data processing, or being able to use common frameworks like TensorFlow or PyTorch for distributed training. So you need a lot of that functionality, and if you go about trying to kind of build this yourself, that's a bit of a heavy lift. And at the end of the day, you're kind of sacrificing those precious developer hours building something that really already exists, like SageMaker Pipelines.
So it sounds like what you're really trying to do is help people get through a lot of the tedious work so you can get to training, building models, the actual results of machine learning, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
So can we talk about what some of the benefits are around building a training pipeline?
Sure, yeah. So Bobby kind of talked a little bit about like that reproducibility, but then there's also the the consistency, the traceability throughout that pipeline. So when we talk about things like model lineage and knowing how that model or that machine learning model was built, also in terms of building a pipeline, there's a couple of advantages where with SageMaker Pipelines, you can still actually tap into SageMaker jobs for like training, deployment, data pre-processing. So you're using the right compute for the step inside your pipeline. So you're going to use the right compute for training, the right compute for data pre-processing, as well as really being able to take that pipeline that you may have used during model development, experimentation, and actually take that forward as your model retraining pipeline for production.
So Shelby, we had a session earlier today called the culture of DevOps, and we talked about something in that session called the hero pattern, which is an anti-pattern in CI/CD pipelines where you put everything, all responsibilities onto one person, right? Do you all see that in the data science world as well with customers, and that might be one of the reasons to have one of these training pipelines as well?
Sometimes we see that, yeah. It kind of depends on the segment. Startups operate different than enterprises, so it kind of depends a little bit. With MLOps, one of the complexities that gets brought in is it's not just software development anymore. We also have data engineers, we have ML engineers, we have data scientists, and then oftentimes you have a centralized deployment team too. So I think MLOps is still relatively immature in practice in comparison to DevOps, but yeah, sometimes that can happen where you have this full stack unicorn that doesn't necessarily exist, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I think a lot of learnings from both sides to join together there. That's really neat. So, I've heard you have a demo.
We do have a demo.
We like demos. Demos are fun.
Perfect. So for today, what we thought we'd do is just demo the SageMaker native capabilities. Once again, there's a lot of different ways to implement MLOps practices. SageMaker Pipelines is one of those ways. And like I mentioned before, Pipelines really has 3 different components between projects, pipelines, and model registry. So we're going to go with projects. So what projects allow you to do is essentially instantiate an ML pipeline automatically through what we call MLOps templates. So we're going to do that through the console. Actually, we're in SageMaker Studio. So from SageMaker Studio, if you go over here on this side, select the drop down of projects. This is where you can actually create a new project. So as a data scientist, I would be the one that's consuming the project. The creators of these projects are typically someone who's really comfortable with infrastructure configuration as code, so like a DevOps team member. But you can see here, SageMaker has a bunch of built-in templates that cover, model build, train, and deploy, or just model build and train, or just model deployment. Kind of depends. We have customers that use SageMaker in every way, so we try to have that flexibility. There's also the flexibility to bring your own templates. So what this allows you to do is build CloudFormation templates that can be instantiated multiple times by data scientists, but they also have your own controls or guardrails implemented for you and your organization, whatever makes sense.
Can I ask a question real quick, Shelby?
Of course.
One of my specialties is asking dumb questions, so forgive me if it is a bit simple here. So, in the DevOps world, right, which is the world I'm familiar with, not so much the ML world, there's kind of an accepted pattern for building a CI/CD pipeline, right? Where there's a build server, deployment server maybe, version control over here on the left. Is there kind of like a pattern that's being developed or is already developed, and did SageMaker Studio take that, path forward?
That is a great question. Yeah, absolutely.
I did it, but you ruined my reputation of
It's his
asking.
first one today.
Sorry.
So.
Yeah.
What an average question.
Thank you.
No, that's exactly the point. Is what we tried to do is take all the best practices, right, that we've kind of come up with. And what that ends up being is it's not as linear, I guess I would say, as a software development CI/CD pipeline, right? Because there are different dependencies, different life cycles within there. So you have your data pipelines, your training pipelines, and your deployment deployment pipelines.
Oh, even different pipelines. That's interesting.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons that model registry that I talked about becomes so important, because it becomes central to the story, essentially, where your model registry not only has metadata about your model versions, but it also can become a handoff between those model build and model deployment steps, almost like a contract, if you will, of that model.
Very cool.
So in this case, what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and just do the build, train, and deploy script. One thing to point out here, a lot of these are going to use the code suite under the covers, so like code commit for source control, code build for build scripts, code pipeline for orchestration. There is also the option to use third-party Git repositories, so you could use GitHub Enterprise,
Nice.
use Bitbucket Cloud, or also Jenkins for orchestration.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily locked into anything. So I'm going to choose this one, and you can see these are kind of the descriptions over on the side. And then just select project template. And then give it a quick name. You can see I've done this demo a couple of times in this account.
Wait, this isn't a unique demo just for us.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
It's
good.
special because it's number 4.
Oh, perfect.
That's
perfect.
right.
Yeah, 4 makes it unique.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So then it just goes in, creates a project. This takes a couple of minutes, because ultimately what it's doing is, like Bobby talked about before, piecing together, and what we kind of heard from customers, piecing together all these different workflows is a lot of work because of the integrations that have to happen between the source control, the automated triggers. So what it's doing essentially is building all of that out for you through infrastructure, configuration as code. So I do have a pre-baked one that we'll take a look at. So that would be number 3 here. So you'll see once it's actually done, takes 2 or 3 minutes, depending on what it's doing. But you can see here, essentially it's going to set up your code repositories for you.
Okay.
It will automatically populate with some seed code. So mainly just to kind of show, like you were talking about, the best practices of what we've seen. So the seed code is going to show essentially what we view as some of the best practices that we've seen, where you have decoupled data preprocessing, training, deployment code. And you'll see this is that first component of SageMaker Pipelines I talked about, which is the SDK. So you'll just kind of see here, here's the visualization of it. This is all built out through Python code, but it is essentially a training pipeline. And you can see, you click on each step, probably what you'd expect, that we actually capture all of the metadata that's on input. So how was this model built? What's happening in this particular step? What's the output of this step that then feeds into the next one? You can see the output here, or the artifact, is actually data in this case. And then logging and that sort of thing that you'd kind of expect with pipeline tooling. So that is the pipeline aspect. If we go back, you'll notice with projects, it not only set up those repositories, but it also does set up a model group in the model registry. So this is actually what becomes key to essentially tracking the model versions, right, at scale. So without a model registry, it's really, really tough to do that. So the model registry is automatically set up when you instantiate a SageMaker project.
Okay, so this would be like the equivalent in a CI/CD pipeline of like a Docker hub, or like an artifact registry, basically.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, it's all just metadata pointing to, it'll point to like the model artifact. Some people store it in Artifactory. S3 is kind of the default for SageMaker, but yep. And you'll see here when you kind of click on this version, basically it's just going to have all the metadata associated with that model. So you have like model quality metrics. So this is actually how the model performed. And why this is nice is you could have essentially almost like a peer review, right? With DevOps, you do peer review of code.
Oh, yeah.
You can do that here, obviously, as well. But then also this is almost a peer review of that model and how it performed. And then based on that, and then there's a bunch of other data, as you can tell, that we kind of track for it. Based on that, you can update the status, basically say, that looked good.
Oh, cool.
Approve it. And then what that does is kick off a deployment pipeline automatically. So what it's going to do, and these take a little bit more time to run, but it will deploy to a SageMaker endpoint, essentially. So that way it's up and available for prediction requests.
And so at that point, you're really just ready to start feeding it data?
Yep, exactly.
That's super cool.
Yep.
I think that was easy enough. You could have done it.
Wow. Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's a lot of faith you put in me. Right. What about all the compute? Basically, there's compute probably to build models. There's compute to deploy. Do I have to manage that as
No, that's a great lead-in, actually.
Hey, you know,
Wow.
I'll set you up. There you
no,
go.
that's a great lead-in. So essentially, and that's a great thing to point out, when you look at this pipeline that's executing, it's executing code from that Python SDK in the background.
Yeah.
But essentially, each one of these steps is running a transient job in the background. So we talked about kind of decoupling or actually using the compute that's right for the step.
Yeah.
So each one of these is essentially running a different type of SageMaker job. So this is a SageMaker processing job, which is really good for, I mean, it's really a transient container environment, but a lot of times it's used for data pre-processing as well as model evaluation. If you go to this one, this step is actually being run by SageMaker training jobs, which again is secondary compute. That's transient compute, GPU, CPU, whatever you need in terms of like the number, type, size. So it's actually being run on a second transient cluster. And then, similar to here, evaluate again is going to be running a SageMaker processing job under the covers.
So one of the nice things you can do with these SageMaker pipelines is that if you have each of your steps requiring different compute, you can actually parameterize your pipeline, so you can define inputs.
Wow.
And that way you can reuse the pipeline instead of having to just tweak a few parts of the pipeline and have all these pipelines out there with only a few minor changes in them. You can instead just have one pipeline with inputs, and you can say, hey, I want my processing to use this kind of compute, and my training to use that kind of compute. So that's another cool thing that you'll see there.
That's really cool.
Oh yeah, there it is, right there. Yeah.
There they
That's
are.
really
there it
cool.
is.
Just one central pipeline, essentially, that you can have one team manage that pipeline, and then just the teams that are building models or training models, they just come in and set their parameters. That's an option, but
It's
maybe
an option,
not
yeah.
the
There's
best
some different,
option.
yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
Yep. You can actually do step caching in here too, which is kind of nice, especially for machine learning, especially when, like I mentioned, a lot of these steps take a long time to run. So you can do step caching as well. So that way you can cache the results of like a previous training job or data pre-processing and just pick up where you were left off.
Oh wow, that's pretty nice. And again, this is just my own ignorance. What are some of the things that are happening in like the pre-processing? Like what would pre-processing data be in one of these pipelines?
In this one, do you want to take it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, this could really be anything, right? Like, the step here is really to take that raw data that a lot of customers have and transform it in a way that not only can be used for analysis further down the road by an analytics team, but also to prepare that data for model training and then later deployment. So that's kind of a critical step right there. And we've got a lot of tooling around that makes it pretty easy to use. Pandas and Spark and everything else that a lot of developers and data scientists are kind of used to using.
So that could even lead into a process that is not necessarily machine learning. You could go dump that in, a Redshift or like S3 and use Athena to query it later too, and just you're cleansing your data during that step. So that one step alone might not necessarily even be something that leads to training a model, but is still automatable through this SageMaker pipeline.
Sure, you could totally do that.
Yeah.
You can have a pipeline with 1 step, 2 steps, whatever you need.
I know you're laughing because it's not that simple. But to us on, maybe not the strong data science side, that's still compelling.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously you want to get to this larger process. It makes a lot of sense. And in training, same thing here. Like you can pull in different libraries, whatever you need.
Yeah, so you can basically use, there's no limitations. It's essentially anything that SageMaker training jobs support, this supports. So there's built-in algorithms, built-in frameworks, like Bobby was mentioning, PySpark, TensorFlow. But there's also the ability to completely bring your own container as well and kind of run virtually anything you want. Yep.
That is super cool. So my chance to ask a really dumb question, but when jumping back on the compute side, were you able to take advantage of like the Trainium and Inferentia chipsets as well? Is that something you can set up in the pipeline?
This, essentially because you're picking the compute here.
Yeah.
So within the pipeline, there's a configuration. In fact, we can go to that. Oops. So I'm going to go to the repository here. So you can see Like with this project that gets built, there's actually a model build and model deploy repository. If you clone this model build, you'll see exactly the configurations like
that's
you're
really
talking
cool.
about.
Yeah.
But like Bobby said, most of the time you'll see those instance type and sizes parameterized within a pipeline, so that way you can change it without changing your pipeline code necessarily. But if we go to look at our pipeline code, you'll see within here, basically you're setting up the configurations just as you would with SageMaker training in general. So this is essentially setting up the configuration for the processing job. So it takes all the same things on input, like here. There's like instance type.
We are unfortunately out of time. I'm sorry. This is really compelling, and I really appreciate you all not laughing too much at my jokes. A little, but that's fine. Thank you for coming on.
No, thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
And showing us all of this. Go out and create an ML pipeline today with SageMaker Studio, and stick around for more great content.
We'll be right back.